Hello and welcome to another episode of Cyberspeak with Infosec Institute. Today's guest is Dan Cornell, the Chief Technology Officer at Denim Group. Dan's had a diverse and interesting background in all things tech, but his primary specialty is web application security. We're going to talk to Dan today about his career journey and some of the steps you can take today to enter a career in AppSec. A globally recognized application security expert, Dan Cornell holds over 15 years of experience architecting, developing, and securing web-based software systems. As a Chief Technology Officer and a Principal at Denim Group Limited, he leads the technology team to help Fortune 500 companies and government organizations integrate security throughout the development process. He is also the original creator of ThreatFix, Denim Group's industry-leading application security program management platform. Cornell was principal investigator as Denim Group researched and developed the hybrid analysis mapping technology that lies at the heart of ThreatFix through a small business innovation research contract with the Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate. Dan, thank you for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Great. Well, let me start out today by asking you a bit about your professional journey. How did you get interested in application security as a practice or a vocation?
All right. So I'm a software developer by background.
Okay.
A computer science degree from Trinity University.
Yep.
Where as a liberal arts university, they train you to learn new things, but a big part of that computer science education was vocational training to be a professional programmer, or to go on to grad school. But my role was more to become a programmer, and so in the mid to late 90s, I did a lot of early work with server-side Java, doing e-commerce, development of e-commerce sites, workflow systems, things like that. In the early 2000s, doing some work with early versions of Microsoft's ASP.NET web framework. But I'd always had an interest in security, and so following along with the research that the folks at the Loft were doing, and then commercialized in Loft-heavy industries. As I said, we were doing development of e-commerce sites, and so when you're dealing with credit card information, that's a concern that you had. So security was always something that I was interested in. And then in the early 2000s, I met who is now one of the other principals at Denim Group, John Dixon. And John Dixon, his background is...
Former guest on our show, I should point out as well. Yeah, we talked about hacking the midterms.
Oh, very good. Yeah. So
a lot of fun.
Notes. But John's background was as an Air Force information warfare officer, intel officer. His career, followed a much more traditional information security background from the Air Force and Trident Data Systems, KPMG Information Risk Management. And I met him through some contacts, and we got to talking. And he said, I see what you guys are doing in the application development space. And I have a background that is very traditional for the security space. And as we got to talking, the conversation became like the really interesting things that were happening in the security space had a lot to do with applications. And so, you look at organizations and, hopefully everybody's got a firewall and they've locked it down, but they poke holes in the firewall at ports 80 and 443 for web applications. And so from an attacker standpoint, that started to be a very attractive attack vector. And so, in the conversations, John said, I see the application security challenge, but people with my background that make up the installed base, if you will, of the professionals in the security industry don't know anything about development, right? And if we did coding, it was in COBOL or Fortran way back in the day. But most of the people in the security space come from either kind of John's background from the military and in from an audit standpoint, or from a systems administration background in a penetration testing and things like that. But they don't necessarily know about web application development. They don't know about integrated development environments. They don't know the lingo. They don't know the tools, and that's a real challenge. And so that is what led to Denim Group's information or application security practice. Is essentially saying, from a chocolate and peanut butter standpoint, what if we took the risk management focus of of information security and applied that to the discipline of application development and software development? And so that's really how my interest got weaponized or professionalized, or however you want to look at that.
Okay, let's go back and sort of be very granular about how you got to the point where, meeting John, you were, had the skills and background that, would say, like, hey, let's get together and collaborate. So like going back to like college, or your studies and stuff, like what were like the classes, the degrees you got, what were the activities you were doing right out of college? What were the sort of steps along the way to get you from X, Y to Z?
Right. And so again, a pretty standard computer science education at a liberal arts university. And so, a lot of, algorithm design, data structures. I took electives in networking, and I had a particular focus in undergrad on graphics and simulation activities. That's what I wrote my undergraduate thesis on, but also taking classes in discrete numbers and in theory, some artificial intelligence theory and things like that. So what I consider to be a pretty well-rounded liberal arts computer science background. But it was interesting because security was never really mentioned. It was always something that was very, considered to be a separate thing. The only times that we talked about security we figured out ways that you could use misconfigurations with the X Windows systems in the computer network to put funny windows on the professor's workstation. We also learned in networking class that you can telnet to the mail port and fake emails as if you were a professor. But that was really the limit of of what, from an undergraduate standpoint at the time, was available from a security focus. And what I'd seen later is certain universities had security classes, but they were very focused on cryptography and the math associated with that, and which is I think very comfortable for academics or for people that are interested in that, and that's obviously an important branch of security. But there wasn't a lot of focus on the practical aspects of information security, or at least not in a broad-based way. And so, graduating from school, I had started a business with Sheridan Chambers, who's one of the other principals of Denim Group, and another fellow. And we did a lot of, as I said, e-commerce development and server-side Java workflow system development. We also did some web hosting. And so we were managing a number of Linux servers. And so security was a concern there. In retrospect, we probably did a bad job. We weren't great systems administrators. We were excellent coders. We were poor systems administrators, and we were abysmal security architects and engineers.
Was that just because no one was good at the time, or was it just a learning curve on your part?
I mean, certainly the world was much less mature.
Right.
And again, our primary focus was we need to write these e-commerce systems, and we figured out we can make a couple extra bucks if we host them. And if we host them, we also need to do patching, and let's turn off some ports and make sure we have a firewall. And so, so we. The security was, several layers out from our primary concern, which was, we make a whole lot of money writing these e-commerce systems for people. Sure. That's our main focus. And so really it was something where, and we never got to a size where we needed specialized security folks. I mean, it was a startup, so everybody was doing a little bit of everything. And so that was also, again, kind of fed what was an ongoing interest in security. Those were some of the responsibilities that we had. We're securing the systems that we had and our customers were on. And again, then that led to those discussions with John Dixon down the road at Denim Group. We'd sold that previous business and gone on to do other things. And Sherry and I started Denim Group, and then John joined up very shortly thereafter. We were still doing application development, but also alongside that, working with organizations, helping them with the application security. And our background, it was interesting coming into the world of security from a software development background. And I think that has helped me from a career standpoint, helped our organization, because we understand what software development looks like. And we've done waterfall software development. We've done agile software development. And now as we see organizations transitioning to DevOps, that's a very natural thing for us to understand as well, because it's, we understand the challenges that software developers face. And so that's something I think has been very helpful for me to be much more pragmatic, because security is obviously an important thing. And from an application security specialist standpoint, that is a very important thing. But I think it's also important to be able to take a step back and look at things from the perspective of the developer to say security is important, but there's a lot of other things that are important as well. And in a lot of cases, more important. So,
right. Yeah, we've been hearing that pretty regularly amongst, industry leaders and so forth, that it's always going to be more helpful to you to know all the steps along the way, all of the different possibilities, not just how to plug the security into whatever you're working on. You need to know the thing that it's being plugged into.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the bulk of, a scenario I like to throw out to people that are more security purists is, if you look at two software developers, right, and one of them delivers all of their code on time, on budget, meets the deadlines and delivers whatever innovative functionality, whatever your organization has promised to customers. If you look at that software developer, but maybe they didn't pay any attention to security, and you contrast that software developer with a developer that builds everything with perfect or near perfect, focuses very much on security and the secure aspects of the system, but misses all their deadlines and never delivers functioning software. Like, what are the career arcs of those two developers going to look like?
Right.
I suspect that one is going to have a long and fruitful career, and one of them is probably going to have to find other work before
going to get left behind. Yeah.
Right. And obviously the reality is a blend of those things, but I think that's an important, it's important for security professionals to recognize that security is very important. If you look at organizations that are undergoing digital transformation, it's critical for security to be a valuable risk management resource. But you also understand that you have, in the spectrum of things that developers do, security is only one, right? And at the end of the day, that team needs to be delivering value. And to the degree that you can, as a security professional, provide risk management and advance that value, you're going to find yourself to be more sought after by people in your organization.
So because we're helping to try and educate people, to become more sought after, and because I know many of our viewers who watch these might have only minimal IT or cybersecurity or security experience, could you walk me through the day-to-day activities of an AppSec specialist or architect or creator?
And so there's a number of different roles. If you look at application security, there are roles where an application security person is going to help the teams that are building software. Mm-hmm. There are roles where someone in application security is going to be testing the security of software. And there are roles where the application security weighs in on kind of the ongoing running of software. And some people break those up into like builder, breaker, defender. That's one way to look at it. I don't know if from a software developer standpoint, I don't know if many software developers wake up in the morning, like get out of bed and say, looking
put on my breaker hat,
building.
Yeah.
But if we look on I think what is most common that people think about in application security space or in security in general is security testing, and so the breakers. And so the day-to-day activities there may be doing security code reviews. So using automated tools to scan code, looking at the results that come out to remove false positives or recharacterize those results, and doing manual review of code for security weaknesses to find the kinds of vulnerabilities that the scanners just aren't able to find. Or doing dynamic testing of applications, web applications, web services, mobile applications, where they're, again, potentially using automated scanners, cleaning up those results, or using things like web proxies to make fake requests to web applications to see if they can make those applications behave in a way that they're not supposed to. Again, and so doing testing of like dynamic running systems. And so like from the breaker side, that's, again, running tools, cleaning up tools, doing manual testing, and then characterizing those results to communicate to the development teams. Because at the end of the day, and this is one of the really interesting things about application security, at the end of the day, the developers have to do something typically to make the software more secure. Right. And so that's really important, is to understand as a person doing testing, you have to be able to communicate with those developers to let them understand, here's the risk. Here's what the problem is. Here's why it's a problem. Here's the risk. And here are the things that you need to do in order to be able to fix that. So that's what from a breaker or a tester side of things, those are the kind of typical activities. From the builder standpoint, it's a question of like, hey, how do I help these software developers while they're building software to help them avoid introducing problems? And so, and this is an area that I think is really important and is often overlooked. A lot of organizations look first and say, well, we got all this software, let's break it. And again, that's a natural entry point. But if you look at from a value standpoint over time, if you can work with development teams, and maybe you're helping them build threat models. So to understand, okay, hey, developers, let's talk about the architecture of the application that you've built or that you're building. Let's understand how the pieces fit together, and let's overlay some security concerns on there so that we can plan for mitigations for those risks. What do we need to encrypt? Where do we need authentication and authorization? How do we plan early on to build security into this software. We've seen a lot of organizations adopting what we call a security champions model, where they embed a developer in a team or spread across teams to act as the voice of security for those development teams. So if the developers have questions, hey, I'm thinking of transmitting this data. Is there anything that I need to be concerned about? Or we're about to connect to this system. What do we need to worry about? They've got a local resource that can provide answers and potentially reach into a central security organization for additional information. And so that's a pattern that's worked very well because it provides to the developers a resource they can use. And that helps to allay the frustration. There's nothing more frustrating as a developer to build a system, with no one having mentioned security the whole time around. And then you get dinged later on. We're like, well, your developers must be stupid because look at all these security problems. Like, well, you haven't trained them to do this correctly. They had no resources available, no recommendations. It's kind of like an unfunded mandate dropped on people like after the fact. Yeah. And so from a building standpoint, which I think is a really exciting area, that's the type of day-to-day things that you might be doing. From a defender standpoint, again, looking more operationally, you may be operating protection technologies like a web application firewall, real-time application security protection, looking through logs, watching for potential attacks, and helping to defend against those. And so that's, again, more of an operational for things that are that are running in production. And so that's kind of how I view the main roles that you see in the in the application security space, which is cool because it's there's kind of I don't know if there's something for everyone, but there's something for people with a lot of different backgrounds. Yeah, whether that's operational systems administration type of work transitioning into helping people defend, whether that's someone from a pen testing background, network pen testing background, looking at testing applications, or whether that's someone from a development background saying, how do I expand my expertise in the security area so that I can be a resource to people that are building software.
I suppose it depends on the size of the organization, but I'm assuming that these three roles, the breaker and the defender and the builder tend to be different people, or is there a lot of fluidity in terms of one day I'm doing this kind of thing, one day I'm doing another kind, or?
So that really is going to depend on the size of the organization and,
sure.
and the size of the application security team. I think that in a lot of organizations, if you looked at a histogram of size of security team, I think that the 0 is probably going to be the most popular number of the size of the application security team. One half of FTE, the full-time equivalent, is probably going to be the next most popular. One is it's going to drop off pretty quickly.
Sure.
So in a lot of organizations, we talk to people that said like, hey, I've been hired on and it's my job to spin up or start up this application security program. Mm-hmm. I've got all these things to do. Do I want to start by testing some stuff? Do I want to start by reaching out to developers? Do I need to look through some logs and see if we have some existing problems? So again, in a lot of organizations, that's going to be one individual that has to split their time between those types of roles, or concentrate in one at the expense of another. In larger organizations, you start to see more specialization where, hey, we've got our red team, we've got our web app red team over here, we've got our mobile red team over here, and we're starting to roll out security champions, and we've got this level of penetration across our dev teams. So it's, again, is going to depend on the size of the organization, the size of the security team, the size of the app security team.
Folks of our age, I suppose, you said when you went to school, there weren't really security classes to be had, or not as much. But what do you believe? Do you think that certifications, are there certain certifications you think that interested, AppSec aspirants should pursue on their path to becoming an AppSec professional? Do you believe there's a role for professional education and study and learning the ropes of security, or is it still a trial and error kind of situation?
So I will expose my bias. I am personally not a big fan of security certifications.
Okay.
And so filter my comments through that, through that bias. I think if you look at the security industry, I think there are some that, especially if you want to advance, through the ranks of security, you need to be looking at things like the, CISSP, that are more generalized security certifications, but that I think are viewed in a lot of organizations as, table stakes to, mid to senior level, security roles. And so that's something that's out there. There have been some application security certifications that have that are out there. Again, it's something that I haven't looked deeply into because it's not something that I view as really centrally important. One of the things that we've found to be valuable in hiring people for application security roles is looking for folks that have a background in software development, but then have gone on to get a master's in cybersecurity.
Okay.
So master's degree in cybersecurity. That's just something that we've found to be helpful with our culture and with our organization. Like that's a background that we've found to be helpful. Again, other organizations, their mileage may vary because we're looking for folks from often a security testing side of things, and that's just a demographic or a resume pattern that has worked well for our hiring. So
that's sort of a step process. You do the original education, and then you kind of go out in the world and learn some stuff, but kind of come back for your master's once you sort of have the fundamentals in mind, and then you sort of concentrate once you have the sort of tools and then sort of refine them. Is that what I'm hearing basically?
Yeah. And just looking at credentials or background, the most successful people that we've found in the application security space come out of a software development background. Okay. And so what we've found is it's easier to take a software developer and teach them about security than it is to take a more generalized security professional and to teach them about application development. And so if you think about, I look at my background growing up, as a kid, I did a lot of programming. I mean, that was something that, because I was really cool,
Same.
coming up through school and my computer science degree with my math minor. Because I was cool in college too. I continued to be cool. But like that was something that I spent a non-trivial amount of time on growing up. And so, if you look at the hours under my belt that I have coding, even before I started undergrad, and it's not that I was like the master whiz kid coder, but it was something that I was familiar with and I knew is something I spent a non-trivial amount of my 4-year degree doing. Very much time at our startup developing e-commerce sites and things of that nature. And so if I look at the level of proficiency in development and the understanding of the development process, a lot went into me gaining that. And so to say like, okay, well, let's focus in on the security aspects of that. And someone teach me about authentication, authorization, someone teach me about some crypto engineering and things of that nature. That's a smaller syllabus that you've got to chew through, as opposed to if you've got someone who has a lot of experience with security and you're like, okay, well, let's write hello world. Okay. And how do you get from hello world to, modern cloud-based application stacks? There's a lot more steps along the way. And so that's something for application security professionals. It is tremendously valuable to have background in application development, just because that we found that takes a lot of time to gain that experience.
Okay, so let's sort of break down the sort of raw activities. What hands-on work activities should you be really good at and enjoy doing every day? If you want to be in AppSec and so forth, like what would something like you're going to be doing this every day, so you better be really good at it.
Right. Especially for security testers, you'd better be really interested in breaking stuff. Yeah. Right. And how do I make the system behave in a way that it's not supposed to? Right. At the end of the day, that's it goes back to kind of the MIT hacker ethos of like a clever solution to a problem is especially when applied to security, when the problem is how do I get this information that I'm not supposed to have, or how do I make the system do something that it's not supposed to do? And that's something where certain people have that interest, and other people don't. And that's been an interesting thing looking at taking QA people and with people with a QA background and trying to move them into security. Some folks just really have a desire to like figure out like how do the pieces fit together and how can I make them do things they're not supposed to do. And so for security testers, it's like it's that kind of problem solving. And that willingness to like look at things in a different way in order to get things, to get things to break. From a builder standpoint, I think it's important to have a focus on education. It's very helpful to like to teach people, and to understand concepts at a level where you can communicate them to others, because that's a big thing you're trying to communicate to these developers, or to get them to understand and to learn a new thing. To say, hey, developer, you're a great web developer. Let me teach you about some things that you may not know about. Let me provide you a new perspective, a new way to think about these things. And so from a building standpoint or developer support standpoint, I think really liking to educate people and to interact with folks in that way is really important. I'm less familiar with the skill set for the defender type stuff. I think they probably need to look at log files and, again, solving problems, to look at patterns in data to find out, like, what are we seeing here, and how do I connect that to potential malicious activity?
Right. And pretty much everyone I've talked to in the career track field says communication and the ability to communicate your ideas is going to be crucial. And I think that's always needs to be reiterated, that you can be as slick as you want, but if you can't get other people to get on board with your ideas or tell them where they can change or whatever, it's all going to be for nothing. Well,
especially in security and in application security, whereas a tester, you have to communicate. The metaphor of, like, you got to tell people that their baby's ugly, right? Like, hey, you developed this software, you're very proud of it. You hit it on time, on budget.
Right.
Here's how I can make it do a whole bunch of stuff it's not supposed to do.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've seen a lot of challenges with, looking at other people in the field, where they, the relish in breaking things is fantastic. Sometimes you need to split that role of the people that are breaking stuff with the ones that communicate why things are broken. But again, from a testing standpoint, you do have to be able to communicate. Like, here is a problem. Here's why this is a problem. Here's why this can happen in production, and the impact that will have, and the risk associated with it. Because, again, when you're looking at people fixing security vulnerabilities, if I'm a developer fixing vulnerabilities, I'm not building new features and I'm not fixing other bugs. And so, as a risk management professional, you need to be able to communicate to the developers, and most importantly to their management, to the line of business, to let them understand, of all the risks that are out there, here are the ones that we consider to be very serious, where it makes business sense, where there's value in fixing these to manage risk, as opposed to greater value in building a new feature or supporting a customer in a certain way. Because at the end of the day, you're never going to be able to fix everything.
Right.
And smart businesses are you view this, again, through a risk management lens. You can't eliminate risk. You have to manage risk, and at the same time, like, your primary focus is not to is not to have great security. You want to have security that's good enough so that you can bring innovative products to market and not suffer undue damage while you're doing that.
Right.
And so communication is critical for security folks, and that's something that I think has traditionally been a problem with a lot of folks in the industry. They, in security, the focus is so much on the risk management. There's a lack of the communication skills to put the things that you're worried about from security in the broader business context of, hey, I'm willing to accept some of this risk because we need to move faster, and we're willing to take some lumps along the way, because if we can be the first to market with this, then there's going to be a lot of value in that. Or not delivering this to the customer is going to have a financial impact that we know about, as opposed to an unknown risk or a more vague risk of loss if there is some sort of a security incident.
You mentioned that a fair number of companies might, if polled, would say, well, we have 0 people in AppSec, or we have 0.5 or whatever. What type of companies or organizations or industries tend to require a specialist in application security? Do most companies have AppSec teams, or I guess, like what industries would, if you want to get into it, where should you be looking?
Right. And so, again, looking at this from a risk management lens, it's really a question of how much value does your organization derive from software and from the applications that you're developing, and how much risk are you exposed because of that. And so, if you look at the really early adopters were the folks in the financial space, the banks, because when they have problems, they lose money, and like that pain of losing money is great for driving behavior change. Where you see less so in other industries where there's a less direct thing. And so when we look at organizations, the organizations that we work with, again, the banking, insurance, financial services, those folks, both feel the pain and have regulatory concerns, and so they have a focus on application security. What we also see are a lot of organizations that are smaller and growing, but again, where they're deriving a lot of value from software and applications. And so if you look at a lot of startups, well, the entirety of their value is this app and the associated services and the social network or whatever that might be associated with it. And so those organizations also tend to have application security teams because they're, because again, the risk to them is if someone is able to steal our data, mess with this, do whatever, that has a large impact on us. And so really what it comes down to is a question of how much value does the organization derive from the software they're developing, and looked at through the lens of scale and scale of the organization, application count, and as well as the regulatory compliance. And what I think we'll see is, and I think it was Mark Andreessen's essay about how software is eating the world, right? And so more and more companies are becoming software companies, right? That's a requirement. And as we see that infrastructure starts to be defined as code, as we see the world get much more code centric and the skill of coding being more required, I think that's why we're seeing a tremendous increase in the demand for application security professionals, because the world as a whole is deriving much more value from software and is exposed to much more risk from software. So that drives a demand for more of a workforce that can help address that.
So for the benefit of folks who are watching or listening to this podcast, who are thinking about changing career paths, who are not maybe on a security path or, a software development path, what is one thing they could do in their current position that they could change that would move them one step closer to achieving this? Because sometimes it seems impossible. Like I'm not in anywhere in this, but I don't know where to start. So where would you start?
So, I mean, I guess there's two parallel tracks or a couple things that people could do. One thing that I would recommend for a lot of folks is to learn, at least to some degree, to do some coding. Not everybody's going to be a software developer. I don't necessarily know that everybody wants to go through some sort of coding boot camp, although that is a route to learn some of that stuff. But there are a lot of resources out there to at least learn some scripting. How do I use code to make stuff happen, just to understand kind of the pieces and how it fits together. And again, that's something where it's to become that's something that it's a kind of a long road to gain a tremendous proficiency there, but it's something that a lot of people in IT can at least kind of understand how the pieces fit together and how things work. Fortunately, there are also for people that are interested more in testing, there are a lot of resources out there. And so if you go to, for example, the Open Web Application Security Project, or OWASP, it's an international organization. It's a nonprofit. They have, they do a number of things. They run conferences, which are fantastic. They run local chapters, which is a great way for people to get introduced, in a free way to some talks and some resources about this. They've got a lot of materials like documentation that they've published, and they also have some tools. And so they have a tool called OWASP Zap, or the Zed Attack Proxy. And so that is an attack tool that does dynamic web application testing, both automated and supports manual. And there's great documentation around this. There's a great supportive community. And so there's a free tool out there, multiple free tools, but that's an example of a free tool that anyone can use to start doing testing. Now, you got to be careful what you test. You don't want to go to your local bank and start testing their site. They might not be thrilled for the help you're trying to give them. Fortunately, there are a number of intentionally vulnerable web applications and other applications that are out there. OWASP has kind of the old school one is one called WebGoat. There's a newer one called Juice Shop. And so those are web applications that have known vulnerabilities in them, where you can go and do testing against those applications and get a feel for what does the testing process look like. How do I solve this puzzle of, like, I know there's some vulnerabilities in here. How can I make this application? How can I get data out of the application I'm not supposed to be able to? How can I make orders I'm not supposed to be able to, and so on and so forth. And so the great thing is there's a lot of freely available resources out there where you can practice and build skills in a in a safe environment. And you also see a lot of organizations now expose bug bounties. And so maybe your local bank is a great place to go and do security testing if they have a bug bounty, and if you abide by the terms of that bug bounty. And so that's also an area where people that are interested in this can practice their skills and also potentially earn money, rewards, recognition, and things of that nature. And so that's a great thing. Is as the industry has needed more talent, there are resources available for people to learn. Both these chapter meetings, as well as documentation and tools. And organizations kind of shifted the way that they handle bug discovery, bug disclosure. to make that a lot more friendly to non-malicious folks to get involved.
I was going to ask if there were such a thing as freelance AppSec people, but it sounds like bug bounty would be kind of a good way of developing your portfolio without being in an organization. Is that?
Yeah, that is probably the freest Lance way to get it. That is a gig economy.
Yeah. Are there freelance AppSec people who sort of come door to door to organizations and say, "Let me test your applications"?
And that's a good that's not a model that I know much of. Okay. All that these days. I mean, certainly in the past there have been folks that have gone to organizations that I found these security flaws. Do you want to pay me as a consultant to tell you how to fix them? That I don't recommend that because to discover those things, you're probably on the wrong side of one or more laws.
Yeah.
And the organization can react by saying, like, what a great idea, or they can react by saying, let me call my friends at the FBI or the Secret Service.
Release the hounds, yeah.
Exactly. And so but that's a great thing about the bug bounties is they have legitimized that type of testing or provided a path for individuals who are interested in that. So again, that's a great way for people to get in, to build their skills inside of a framework where they are not going to get themselves on the wrong side of the various or very large organizations or the law enforcement arm of whatever country their targets are in.
Yeah, bad way to start your career. So in the future, how do you think career in AppSec is likely to change based on up and coming technologies or new hacker strategies or increased threats? Like where is all this going in the next 5 years?
So the big thing that we've seen in our practice is like the cloud and associated technologies in DevOps and associated kind of culture changes, CI/CD pipelines, like the way that software is developing and gets deployed and is managed is changing very much. And that's making the world much more complicated, but it's also making the world, to me at least, a lot more interesting. And so I think that application security professionals, again, are going to have a strong understanding of, like, let's look at these organizations that are adopting DevOps and that are making this culture change. So we're going to break down the barriers between development and operations. Well, let's also break down the barriers between security and see how we can get security included in this cultural shift. Again, so security can be a risk management, can provide risk management services to these organizations and figure out, well, how are you changing the way you're developing software? How do we integrate security more integrally into that? On the deployment side, understanding that application, when I was managing servers, we had a Linux server, and we would install a new build of the website on there. Hopefully the mail server stayed up and things like that. I mean, it was all this bespoke. All of our servers, the way I've heard it characterized is like all of our servers back then were pets. They had name. We named ours after viruses. So we had like Mataba and Hanta and Ebola. We were all like
sure.
dudes that were just graduating from college, and we thought that was neat. Hopefully your servers aren't pets. Hopefully they're cattle, right? It's okay. We're just going to spin up like 20 new things in AWS or Azure while we need them. Then when we don't need them, we're going to drop them down, right? And so I think also understanding that the deployment model is changing, and with it, the security, it's no longer a question of, I've got this server, have I scanned it with a Nessus or a Nexpose or something to look for open ports. It's a question of, well, I've got this flexible infrastructure spread across one or more clouds, that is allowed to communicate in certain ways. Have I configured all of my cloud servers? Have I configured my cloud storage? Have I configured my XYZ as a service? How are all these pieces interacting? That's where a lot of the challenges are now. That's where we're working with organizations now to figure out, like, okay, hey, this cloud transformation is happening, right? The agility value is too great, cost savings, whatever, too great. We're going this way. How do we make sure that we get all the stakeholders that are weighing in on the security of the system? How do we make sure that they're all working together in a way that is seamless? And so that's a real challenge that we're seeing now. Having a lot of fun working with organizations on is, let's look at, it's not just about the code, and it's not like old school infrastructure, although parts of it are still old school infrastructure, but it's also being deployed in these cloud environments, and those have configuration settings and capabilities, and you're really being able to look at the system as a whole and say, here's the risk that we see across this stuff, both from the network infrastructure, from the code, from the cloud. That's what we're seeing a lot of motion, and where we're having a lot of fun working with organizations. So that's kind of the next step that I think a lot of these app security professionals are going to be asked to do. And again, that's where it helps to have a systems development, systems design, coding background, because I think folks like that have a better kind of background or initial capability to say, oh, I see how these pieces are fitting together, and maybe I don't understand the stuff exactly, but I see how the pieces fit together.
Okay.
Let me go and learn more about the security implications of what we appear to have plugged together here.
Okay, as we wrap up today, tell me a little bit about ThreatFix, the Denim Group's web application security management platform.
Yeah, and so what ThreatFix does is it lets organizations manage their application vulnerability management program. And what it came out of was a situation where we were working with a financial services organization, and the member of the security team needed to do testing for a web application, line of business, fired up a scanner, configured it, ran it, generated a 300-page PDF with a color graph on the front page, went and handed it to the development team and said, I'm from security, I'm here to help. You guys must not be very good at writing software because there's 300 pages of stuff you need to fix. And the question was, okay, well, which of these do I need to fix? And the guys, well, this is security. It's the most important thing. You need to fix them all. And I said, okay, well, how do I fix them? I don't know. I think there's some stuff in the report about that. And so, that report gets dumped in the, gets dumped in the desk.
Dealt with later. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, this security engineer, they were doing perimeter web application scanning with a scanning service. Ran the scan, generated a 200-page PDF with different color graph on the front page. Went to the same developer and said, "Hey, I'm back. I've got some more security stuff you need to worry about. Oh, by the way, what'd you do with that last report that I found that I gave you?" And the developer says, "Okay, well, how is this different than what we saw before?" Answer is, "I don't know. But again, you need to fix all this stuff." And so the developer went up through his management structure and said, "Hey, the security team came around again, and this time they're actively wasting my time. Right? I've got this features. I promised a hotshot VP. We promised them to an important customer. I've got these performance bugs in production that are getting customers aggravated. I've got all this stuff I need to do. Can you give me some help with this?" So a rock got dropped on the security professional. Said, "You shall not talk to another developer until you can come to them with a single list of the problems, an explanation of why those problems are so serious that we need to stop doing other work in order to address them, and you need to tell them how to actually fix this stuff explicitly. You can't be wasting their time." So the security engineer goes and pops up Excel and starts cutting and pasting things, trying to line them up. And so we watched this interaction. And no one was acting in bad faith, right? The security engineer was doing his job, and he was trying. He was like, "I need to make the website secure. This is the way I'm going to do it." The software developer is doing his job. I need to deliver these features and functions on a certain timeline. But the way that they were interacting was bad, and the way that the tools were interacting was bad. And so we built ThreatFix to address that data management problem and that communication problem. So what ThreatFix lets you do is it lets you lay out, here's all the teams we have worldwide developing software and all the applications that each is responsible for. You load in the results of all the testing. So we talked about static testing, we talked about dynamic testing, we talked about the manual aspects potentially of both of those. And ThreatFix normalizes and deduplicates all that data to give you that one list of here are the problems that are currently open for this application. Then it lets you bundle those up and ship those over to the developer in the tools they're already using. So if they're using Jira to manage their workflow and their backlog, instead of saying, read this report or log into my system over here, you can say, hey, I just took these 20 cross-site scripting vulnerabilities and I put those in your system as a ticket, a trouble ticket that lives alongside all the other stuff. And so, again, that shows an understanding of the developers and the tools they're using and how they've developed Scrum meetings and a tempo of all these meetings and whatnot to manage their workload. And so ThreatFix lets you manage those vulnerabilities through to resolution. And then it gives you data about your program as a whole. So from a risk management standpoint, you can take a much more quantitative view of your security program. Again, we saw these challenges organizations have with hundreds, thousands of applications, lots of data, and poor communication. And with the ThreatFix platform, we put organizations in a situation to help address those issues. So again, they can better incorporate security as a risk management service alongside development and operations to drive business value.
Dan Cornell, thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
And thank you all today for listening and watching. If you enjoyed today's video, you can find many more of them on our YouTube page. Just go to YouTube and type in Infosec Institute. Check out our collection of tutorials, interviews, and past webinars. If you'd rather have us in your ears during your workday, all of our videos are available as audio podcasts. Please visit infosecinstitute.com/cyberspeak for the full list of episodes. If you'd like to qualify for a free pair of headphones with a class sign-up, podcast listeners can go to infosecinstitute.com/podcast to learn more. And finally, if you'd like to try our free Security IQ package, which includes phishing simulators you can use to fake phish and then educate your colleagues and friends in the ways of security awareness, please visit infosecinstitute.com/security IQ. Thanks once again to Dan Cornell, and thank you all again for watching and listening. We'll speak to you. Thank you. We'll speak to you next week.